Okay, hello. Welcome to Beastly Theories. I'm your host, Andy McGrath. Today we've got Lyle Blackburn. Lyle is an author, cryptid researcher from Texas. He investigates things like beasts in the southern part of the US. He's written The Beast of Boggy Creek, Beyond Boggy Creek, and Lizard Man. He's had a lifelong fascination with legends and sighting reports of unknown creatures. And during his research, he's been all over these backwoods and the swampland areas there in Texas and other areas as well. He's a frequent guest on Coast to Coast AM. He's appeared on numerous television shows, including Monsters and Mysteries in America, Strange Evidence, Finding Bigfoot. Also featured in the award-winning documentary film Boggy Creek Monster. And he's narrated several other films for Small Town Monsters productions, including Bray Road Beast. Welcome, Lyle. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me.
I am very, very glad to have you here, actually. Now, I did explain to you before the call started, I do have a cold. So for any listeners out there that can't understand me, there will be subtitles later. You're a highly regarded cryptozoology writer, speaker, field investigator, film narrator, as we just mentioned. How did it all come about? I'm assuming you just didn't get up one day and say, hey, I think I'm going to become a famous cryptozoology personality because that's where the money is, right? How did you start down this road?
Right. I don't think any of us were thinking that, right? It's just something like a lot of us just, as at an early age, I was just fascinated by reports of, what I thought of as monsters back then. I loved horror movies and Frankenstein and things like that. But when I started reading books about Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, the Yeti, that really caught my imagination and kind of freaked me out because I thought, wow, there could be something like this out there. And I grew up hunting with my father. He was an avid deer hunter. So I was in the woods a lot and went through small towns and things like that, places where people had seen and reported cryptid activity. So, that kind of stuck in the back of my mind when I was out there. And just ever since then, I've just been a sort of a casual reader of books and I watched, whatever documentaries and television shows were available at the time. And I've been a musician and a writer all my life. And at some point I wanted to write a book and I thought, well, what is my favorite subject? And it was the subject of The Legend of Boggy Creek, which was a movie based on sightings of a Bigfoot-like creature in southern Arkansas, close to where I live in Texas. And so I just literally took a break from my band to write that book just because I wanted to. I wanted to know, the whole story behind it. And the book came out. It was a good seller, and I got a great response from it, and things just went from there. So, TV shows that featured that kind of stuff started calling, and the ball just kept rolling. So I thought, well, this is cool. Maybe I should write some more books. And, there's plenty of legends I'm fascinated in. So it just kind of went from there.
How long has it been since that happened? When did the book come out? I know Amazon tells me 2013, but I'm thinking it's earlier than that. Is that right?
The Beast of Boggy Creek came out in 2012. And I started the research part of that around 2009. And then up to there, prior to that, I kind of hooked into some local groups that were looking for Bigfoot, Sasquatch, things like that. Kind of got up to speed on what was going on as far as modern research, like literally people with boots on the ground. And I got involved in that. So it's been about a decade, give or take, in which I've been literally consumed by this on a daily basis.
And you mentioned that you're a musician. Now, I know that obviously when we met in London, you were playing, so I came up to see you play, but unfortunately, due to our classic London transport, everything was off. So the moment I got there, I had to leave and go home, so missed the whole thing. So you've been a musician for a long time, I take it. How does that match with your life, being a cryptozoologist on the one hand and being active on the scene? And then I'm assuming that you still tour and you still write albums as well. How do you put both those together?
It's kind of difficult. I mean, both of them can be a full-time endeavor. But as somebody who's made a living at sort of both of these trades over the years. Without the music, I couldn't do this because while in fact, I'm one of the better sellers on my publisher, but there's the market for these kind of books is not, we're not talking about a huge market. So, I mean, in order to do this, you have to have some supplementary income. So I've always kept the band going, though it's been difficult to go on long tours because I'm constantly booked to speak at events or do book signings. So, and then to do research, if I'm researching a book, I mean, I may have to go out of state, interview people, and just do all the things that goes along with that, as well as just, going in the woods and experiencing things for myself. So it's definitely a juggling match to do it all, but it's all enjoyable. So, I just do my best.
I think that's, for me, it's a very similar thing. It has to be about the enjoyment. Now that actually brings me on to your reputation. So in the cryptozoology community, like many others, we have our feuds and factions, and I've never heard anything but positive feedback about you from researchers and fans alike. What do you think is the key to bridging that denominational gap between the different schools of cryptid thought?
Well, I think that, I've seen a few things about me on the internet, which I find funny. Usually the criticism, like, the hat or something. It's like, so what?
Okay. Can't find cryptids with hats on. Huh?
Yeah, it's apparently a law against that. But other than that, people often ask, has anybody hassled you about this, especially when I'm on tour or something? But it's really weird. People, I could be anywhere playing a gig and people come up and they want to talk about Bigfoot, or they want to know about the monster thing. I mean, they're seeing the band, but they also want to know about the other thing. So I've only found people fascinated. As far as my reputation and things, I first and foremost, I think it's fun. It's fun to research. It's a fun topic, and I put that first. I mean, we may never in our lifetime discover and prove one of these creatures, Bigfoot, for example. So, you don't want to put all, your money in the bank on that. If you're not having a good time enjoying the friendships that you encounter, enjoy going into the woods, enjoy interviewing people, then what are you doing? So I keep that. And I also keep an open mind about theories behind it. People get latched onto theories and argue about it. It's like, hey, nobody's an expert, not even me. I can't prove any of it. I can only have an open mind in approaching the subjects, and keep revising those theories as I go, but that doesn't mean anybody else is wrong. So there is really no basis for argument. I mean, I know some people who claim to have seen one of these creatures up close. They got a little bit more invested in it, but I'm not trying to persuade anybody to believe in these. I'm more of an investigative journalist that presents the fascinating details of a case or something, in a book or whatever. And hey, it's there for us all to consider and to make a decision about.
I agree with that, actually. I think that excuse me, generally speaking, there are no experts, and obviously people who've seen something will have more of a formed opinion on what they thought they saw. But generally speaking, if it's not fun, if you don't love it, then why bother? I would describe myself as a fan. I still describe myself as a cryptozoology fan, not a cryptozoologist, because I'm not a zoologist to begin with. So how can I add crypto onto the front of that anyway? Now, there are many creatures in your books, and I'd like to go over a few of them. So the Beast of Boggy Creek, let's just start with that. That's the folk monster. Is that how you say it, folk or folk monster?
Falk
monster. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the creature is said to dwell in the southwest part of Arkansas. It's kind of swampy down there. Hardwood forests and the Sulphur River bottoms. The creature is essentially what I would define as a southern Bigfoot. It's generally described as a 6 to 7 foot tall, ape-like creature covered in hair. It can walk upright on two legs. It's been cited by people for years and years, from hunters to people driving down the road and things like that. it's one that was made particularly famous because of a movie called The Legend of Boggy Creek, which came out in 1972.
I remember it. Yes.
Yeah, it was just a huge movie, and for people of a certain age, a lot of people remember that, especially ones who are fascinated by the subject matter, and that just kind of propelled it to this worldwide following, where people knew of the Boggy Creek Monster, where you have a lot of those kind of little small town cases, but they didn't have a big movie associated with it. So I was one of those people who, as a kid, I saw the movie in a drive-in theater, actually. And that was one of the key points that really changed my outlook on these things, because whereas Bigfoot, at that time, I associated with the Pacific Northwest, the Yeti was in the Himalaya Mountains, Loch Ness Monster, Scotland. They were all so far away from Texas. But when I saw this tale of a Sasquatch-like creature in southern Arkansas, about 3 hours from where I live, this was home territory. So that was a very instrumental part. And then as an adult, that's what made me want to find out the whole story behind that. What were the story of the sightings? How was the movie made? What about the movie is true or false, or how much was made up or not made up? And that's the Fouke Monster just became kind of my initial focus, and I'm associated with the Boggy Creek thing now, obviously. But that creature is got a lot of good and credible reports, so I think it's one of those that stands out among other cryptids.
I mean, it was always fascinating to me. I saw that film as a child, maybe 8 or 9 years old. I don't know what channel it was on here, but we had very few channels as I was growing up. So it was on some reference channel to some American program somewhere they played the movie. Now, you also talk about in your other book, Beyond Boggy Creek, other southern Bigfoot or southern Sasquatch. Or what kind of other sightings are in that area, Texas and in the southern U.S.?
The premise for Beyond Boggy Creek was that while the Fouke Monster, the Legend of Boggy Creek, was the most famous, there are a lot of other fascinating and equally as sensational encounters of creatures all throughout the Deep South, American Deep South, which consists of about 10 states. So you have sightings that are dispersed across Oklahoma, Arkansas, Texas, all the way over to Florida, where you have the skunk ape. And, people don't think about Texas, for example, as a place where Bigfoot would exist, because it's a big place, but part of it is very dusty and ranch-like on the western portion, but in the eastern portion, you have pine forest. Excuse me.
Bless you.
A piney forest where there's a long history of sightings. So, just going back and looking at the history of those areas, I was able to kind of, add to the whole southern Bigfoot canon, saying that the Legend of Boggy Creek is one that everybody may know, but check out all these other ones. There's just a long history in all these states.
I think that really intrigued me. You might remember that I have the book actually, signed by yourself from when we met. I really, really did enjoy it, and I think similarly to here in the UK, when we hear about Bigfoot sightings, and there are even some close to this area in Surrey, which we commonly refer to as the woodwows, or that we used to refer to as the woodwows. It's strange to think of something like that near to where you live, because it's always easy to conceive of something like the Yeti or the Sasquatch, in the far away climate somewhere, in dense forests, in places that are far from you, because you don't have to imagine what it's like to live there and conceive of that animal surviving. So I think in Texas, obviously, that's a huge state. And most of the states are very, very big. And I would imagine comparative to the actual land, the mass of land area, the population is very low, at least from an urban perspective. Is that right?
Yeah, the big cities are quite spread out. Yeah, definitely. And, it's if you took all the forestry and crammed it into one area, it's
Uh-huh.
it's second only to Alaska in
Oh
square
wow.
miles of forestry. So when you start looking at it things that way, you're like,
Mm.
Texas Bigfoot, that sounds ridiculous. But if you kind of look at it in a more ecological and geographical lens, you
Mm.
find that, wow, this seems to make some sense, especially because if you plot all the Bigfoot sightings in Texas, perhaps not coincidentally, they're all in that piney woods area. There's a
Mm.
few out in the central Texas and a few in the western Texas, but it's very few and far between. It tends to follow what you would logically think would be Bigfoot habitat. And then where you get into East Texas, right on the border there, you've got the Sabine River, the Caddo Lake, and that all kind of spills into Louisiana, where you start
Uh-huh.
getting into this bayou country where, again, you have sightings of ape-like creatures in swampy environments. So Texas has a huge area that, when you look at it
Mm.
logically, you can see why there's Bigfoot sightings, or could be, because there's a lot of land area in all those states. You start looking at Alabama and things where the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains are coming into the state. Those are where you're going to see the sightings. And of course, Florida, there's a lot of swampy areas, places that are hard to get to, and not very much developed. And you have all the skunk ape sightings. So a lot of it,
Yes.
while it seems unlikely and seems like Pacific Northwest is the perfect place,
Hmm.
these other places have some merit, and they certainly have a history of sightings.
I was in the US in September in a few different locations, and one of the things that really struck me as I was normally in a landing formation on Delta or one of those internal flights was the sheer amount of forest and woods. And I think I was in Florida, Atlanta, Kentucky, a bunch of places anyway, Portland, Maine as well. Just forest as far as the eye can see. Now, Britain, it's actually only 10.6% urban sprawl, the entire country, but it's still a very small country comparatively, even though there's a lot of untenanted space. And I think really what these creatures need is isolation, or the ability to stay away from people as much as they can. And you certainly have that there. My wife actually grew up in Arlington, Texas, which is between 6 and 12, I think. So she speaks of this, and she's from Israel, from a tiny country, even smaller than my own. So she speaks of this massive country where they would seem to, or state where they would seem to just drive for hours and hours and hours to get anywhere. Um, which is not the experience here. I know you've written a Beast of Boggy Creek. Beyond Boggy Creek, what really piqued my interest, and I don't have this book yet, is the Lizard Man, true story of the Bishopsville monster. What's the Lizard Man?
That case occurred in Bishopville, South Carolina, and started in the late 80s, in which people there reported seeing a upright anthropomorphic type creature that appeared to be greenish or brown, covered in scales, and it was seen in an area called Scape-Ore Swamp. There's a lot of swampy areas in South Carolina, and forested areas as well. And this kind of became a famous case because it had a lot of news coverage, and the sheriff's department there investigated it in a serious manner. Not to say they believed there was a quote unquote lizard man,
Uh,
but they believed the reports and the people that had come forward saying they had seen something. So whether it be a rogue bear, a hoax, or anything else, it had become a concern that they needed to look into, because you had hundreds of people roaming around the swamps and near that little
okay,
small town of Bishopville, armed and dangerous.
okay.
And so it was one that I had read about in a number of cryptozoology books, and was always fascinated, because to me it was kind of like a modern creature from the Black Lagoon. I mean,
Mm.
literally people reporting something like that. So um, when I finished The Beast of Boggy Creek and thought, well, this is cool, maybe I should write some more books, I thought, well, let's look into that one. I've always loved that case. Well, what is this lizard man? So I went out there to Bishopville, stayed there, looked through all the police files, talked to what witnesses were still surviving and things like that. And I thought, wow, this is a great story. And like I've found with a lot of this stuff, a lot of the story hasn't been told because, while it's summarized in a section of another book, maybe cryptid creatures and it's somewhere, lizard man is somewhere in there, there's a whole lot more to the story. So it ended up being my second book, and certainly one that's more bizarre because to explain, just biologically what this could even be is a harder thing. But at the end of the day, you've got credible people who saw something down there, and that's that's the crux of the story.
I think that type of reporting is very important. I do encounter some things here sometimes that I fall outside of what I'm prepared to believe, but the witnesses are just as credible as the Nessie witnesses or the Bigfoot witnesses or some of the strange owl man and flying cryptid witnesses. And I have to say to myself, well, when you're in that situation, sometimes you become, you're in that prestigious place of being the unbeliever who needs to be convinced. Whereas, let's say perhaps we have a little faith in the other things that we're interested in, like Bigfoot, like other things. We can cite perhaps Gigantopithecus as a possible ancestor. But for werewolves, for example, or dogmen, I can't think of anything in the fossil record I can relate that to. Nessie could be a plesiosaur, could be something else. That's fine, becomes plausible. But the paranormal things, creeps in, and I'm not really fussed on that side of things. So I find myself backing off. But you have to be honest. I guess you have to say, yeah, these witnesses are credible, and therefore they believe that they saw what they saw, and we just have to interpret that, right? I was going to mention that I could see that you've done a lot of field investigations to the southern US. What I was interested in, obviously being in a very different environment, is what kind of prep that you need to go out looking for cryptids in Texas, for example. What preparatory advice would you give to amateur researchers going out for the first time in your part of the world? What are the pros and cons? What should they take? What should they watch out for?
Well, I think it probably applies generally to any of these locations where you would want to go. For me, it's you need to know a little bit about the history. Find a place where there's been a history of sightings. That would be the area to concentrate on. And if you're going into wooded areas, which most of these are, if you're talking about cryptids, you need to have some forethought into, what you're going to need in that situation. I, for example, have I've got a backpack. It's got a survival kit in it. It's got all the necessary things that I would need in an emergency situation, because, if these cryptids exist, they're not typically sitting on the side of the road waiting for you. If you want to go out and, you may see one crossing the road, but if you're trying to actively see them, you're going to have to go into rugged places. So, you want to be prepared for that kind of thing, know where you're going, take somebody with you. Then you're going to need things which would be necessary to document anything you found. I mean, the time you don't bring something to cast a track, that's when you're going to find a track. So, you need a good camera, you need casting material like hydrocal, water to mix that with to cast. You need, some binoculars are good, any kind of thermal imaging device or something else to help you see at night. A lot of people have seen this sort of thing on television, and I think the gadgets they're familiar with, but it's the other things you got to think about, just going in places and thinking, well, there's the potential to get hurt. You got to pay attention to don't be on people's land or private property. It's hard, especially in Texas. Most of the land is private property. So you got to kind of study the area, know where you can go, without getting a shotgun.
Oh, could you run into that kind of trouble there?
Yeah, I've been, I've never been chased off by a shotgun, but there's been a few times where we're looking into a case or trying to go to the area where somebody had a sighting, and it's getting encroaching on private land, and people have come up and confronted us and want to know what we're doing and things like that. So I try to tell them, like, hey, I'm Lyle Blackburn. You may have seen me on Monsters and Mysteries. Sometimes that work. Sometimes they don't think that they're not impressed.
They tell you they don't have a TV, right? And
they're not buying it. So it's weird to tell people you're looking for a Bigfoot. Sometimes they're like, oh yeah, man, let me tell you, we saw something weird, and suddenly you get on, you get a bite on some other information.
Yeah.
But the other side of the coin is they're not happy with you being around, and so
and I guess from their perspective, if you do see something, you may attract other attention to their land that they don't want people traipsing about all over the place after your sighting or your evidence looking for Bigfoot. That's a headache. I suppose that factors into it as well. Talking about telling people who you are, you're a successful musician. You're very well known in cryptozoology for what you do as well. You have a child. You have two children or one child. Is that right?
I have a daughter. One daughter.
You have a daughter. How do you find, now this is something I deal with in this area, England being a lot more conservative. Have you had to deal with any negative impact from your chosen career on your child, name calling, invites to parties, even friendships with other parents, all being omitted from those things? Or have you found that Bigfoot and Friends has added something interesting for your child to talk about in school? Or was it just a mixed bag?
No, I mean, she's in first grade, so I don't, a lot of her classmates aren't so much aware of me. I mean, she knows what I do and all that, but as far as the adults or the parents or anybody in this where I live, I've never encountered anything but fascination. People want to ask me about this and know about it, and I've done presentations down in our local library, and lots of the the neighbors and the people we know come to those, and some of my daughter's friends and things. So it's all just been totally positive. People are just fascinated by it. I've never had anybody really give me a hassle. So I don't know if that's just because I don't look like I should be hassled, or if they just genuinely. I find that most people, and the other thing, and kind of our conversations, why people don't, really don't say bad stuff about me, is because you gotta understand why people are skeptical about this. You gotta meet them halfway. If you just come at them like, dude, Bigfoot's real, you better believe, they don't. That's a put off. You have to understand that they don't, like you and I have a greater knowledge, and we know where there's sightings, and we've talked to people who've seen it. These people haven't. So you have to understand they're starting from a skeptical view. But if you kind of identify with, say, yeah, I know it sounds crazy, but check this out. And then you tell them about a scenario or something, and you say, you lay it out like, Texas is a big state. There could only be 500 Sasquatch. Imagine trying to find one of 500. It's harder to find a mountain lion. You imagine trying to find something that wants to stay reclusive, and there's only, say, 500 of them as a viable population spread out in all those woods. And then you see the wheels turning, and they're like, yeah. And once you explain that, then they want to know more. Like, okay, this sounds good. So I find that that's the way to approach people, is understand they're skeptical, and just have fun with it. And it's always been positive for me.
I think it's something similar. If you don't take yourself too seriously, if you don't come on strong, people are more responsive. I always generally say to people, I understand that this is a big ask. It's a big ask to ask you to even consider something like this. And again, I would sometimes mention the big cats here, the hundreds and hundreds of big cat sightings. And yet, nobody's caught one. Nobody's captured one of these big cats. We've got hundreds of bits of footage and photos, and thousands of people have seen them, and yet they're not supposed to be here. And they're managing to survive the British countryside. They're managing to stay out of sight. So what other things could there be, etc., etc.? A very similar principle. coming on to that side of things, actually, some people say these days that Bigfoot is big business. I would disagree with that, but I would say it's popular. And new groups and tours seem to be springing up all over the place. Do you think the merchandising and monetizing of the genre is harmful to its credibility, or does it simply make genuine researchers stand out a bit more amongst the crowd? For example, if you've got three bakers on the street, perhaps everybody just goes there for bread.
Yeah, I think that on one hand, it probably does have an effect on, people complain that mainstream science won't take it seriously. And I think because Bigfoot is kind of this pop culture icon, this isn't a new phenomenon. I mean, in the 70s, you had board games and all kinds of Bigfoot stuff, even then. And I think that, Bigfoot's a board game. Bigfoot's something to exploit on TV or something funny in commercials. I think mainstream science kind of just says, I don't know. I just, you can understand. They just don't want to get involved in that. But, it's something that it's fun. I don't know. It doesn't, all that stuff. At the end of the day, have fun with it. It's part of the culture. And, I'm sure people look at me and think I make money off of Bigfoot and stuff, but it's not really true. I pretty much can spend more. I mean, the amount of time, I can't have a real job. If people want me to write books and talk about this and know about the subjects, I have to spend all the time doing it. That's a sacrifice that I need some compensation. So hopefully by doing a lot of research and then having a book that people enjoy, it's kind of a two-way street where they can buy something, support the research, enjoy the book, and keep me going where I can detail these cases. But it's fun. And if you go to a Bigfoot conference, you do learn something, and you get to see a presentation by persons like myself or Ken Gerhardt or Dr. Jeff Meldrum or you, and get some really good insight. But at the same time, hey, it's fun. You could buy a Bigfoot cast. You could buy, a Bigfoot poster. It kind of keeps you motivated, because at the end of the day, we don't have a lot to show for Bigfoot. We don't have a body. And even though Bigfoot's been exploited and all that, and mainstream science may think it's silly, if somebody were to bring forth a body or some absolute proof, then it would just be, okay, everybody would go silent, because now it's a real deal. So it doesn't matter what perception people have of Bigfoot. If you've got the right proof, that erases everything. And we're starting from a scientific standpoint.
I think that's a good point, Lyle. I also think, think about the Kraken, right? The giant squid, that was the Kraken forever and ever and ever. This giant squid that people were discussing, sailors and seamen and all these, old wives' tales, this folklore. Now suddenly you see one in a museum. Oh, giant squid, huh? On you go. It's impressive, but you don't think, oh my gosh, the Kraken, ever. And maybe one day Bigfoot will be the same thing, just in the the normal book of flora and fauna, and whatever the technical name will be, whoever gets to name it, it's Sasquatch, it's Bigfoot. There it is, and we know that they live here, 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 and here. These are the sustainable populations. These are all the ecological changes we've had to make, environmental changes to protect the animal's habitat. Something like that. That for me makes it credible. The giant squid makes it credible, because for the longest time that was make believe, wasn't it? And I wonder what else we will find. Now, just two brief questions before you go. First, I ask everybody, if you're fully funded, money being no object, where in the world would you want to conduct an expedition? What animal would you search for, and who would you take with you? Who would be your dream team? You don't have to say me.
Of course, you. I mean, you gotta have a guy with a British accent if you want your. If you want to seem legitimate,
you do.
Kind of outweigh.
Don't be fooled. We're not clever. None of us are clever.
It balances
with the voice.
Out the dude with the Texas accent. What can this guy know? He sounds like a Texan. But I think that I would choose to search for the orang pendek in Sumatra, which I find to be one of the most credible and likely cryptids out there. For those that don't know, it's a kind of a smaller version of Bigfoot seen in Sumatra in the Indonesia area. And I think there's some really good sightings, some really good evidence, footprints and things. And so I think, given that that's an area where a few of my colleagues have done a lot of study and research, I would take them along, and that would be Adam Davies and Cliff Barrickman. And, those are a couple of guys that I've known for many years, and we get along very well, and they've done some great research. And that's one place I want to go. I mean, I'm kind of the Southern guy and the swampy Bigfoot sort of dude, but I would really like to go over there. I mean, I could, if not to find ultimate proof, just to say it seems so Indiana Jones to me. So
yeah, you'd have to change your hat.
Yeah, I may have to get like more of a black safari, keep with a theme, but that would be the place I'd go, because it just fascinates me, the orang pendek case.
I think that's a great case, actually. And as soon as you said the orang pendek, I already thought Adam and Cliff. Those are the guys going with him. It's got to be. They've done great work there. So finally, I understand that you have a new book coming out. Is that right?
Right. Momo, the Missouri Monster.
When is that due for release, and where can we get it?
It should hit around March 5th is the release date, and you can get it in the usual places, which would be Amazon. You can get it from my own web store at lyleblackburn.com, where you can get autographed copies of all my books. So I'm excited about this. It's one that's kind of another famous Bigfoot case. And it wouldn't fit in Beyond Boggy Creek. I mean, it kind of applies. Missouri can be considered southern. Some people consider it southern. It somewhat is. But the story was just too big. And it was one that I had read about when I was younger. It'd been covered in some books. And I'm like, one of these days, I'm going to go up there and I'm going to look into the Momo case. So finally, I've done that. And I think people will really enjoy this book. It's fun, and it's got a lot of other, I call it Momo, the Strange Case of the Missouri Monster, because not only are there a lot of Bigfoot sightings, the case of Momo itself in this small town in Missouri along the Mississippi River, but you had some weird associated phenomenon, lights in the sky and disembodied voices, all kinds of spooky stuff that play into that story. So it's really cool.
That's amazing. I'll really look forward to that, and to all the other work as well. My advice to anybody out there who's thinking of buying one of Lyle's books is to get the new one and work your way back to the beginning. They really are great. You've been a great guest. Thank you for coming on, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.